why don't you introduce us to your parents, Fred and Sarah? We meet them quite early on, and they were committed to the struggle, quite prominent activists in the 50s and 60s. Why don't you introduce us to them and their story?
Gosh, my mother and father, my mother's still alive, she's 99, incredibly remarkable, brave, courageous people. I'm so proud of them. And they were both very committed communists, and they fought the apartheid system. They knew that it was inhuman, and they fought it. And it meant that they paid a huge price. Both my parents were in prison. My father was in prison for 6 years. He was tortured very badly. He was in solitary confinement for over a year. They kept him in Pollsmoor prison in the condemned cells. Mm-hmm. So he was entirely on his own, and he's a very sociable person. He was a very sociable person, my father. So for him, it couldn't have been easy to have been isolated for such a length of time. Mm. And for my mother, she was also arrested and banned, but they never gave up. They never gave up the fight. And for me, that was such a valuable lesson, that if there's an inhuman system, you can take it on board, you can challenge it, you can change it. And I mean, history's proven that they were right to a large extent.
Now, what was it like growing up with parents who were so active in the fight against apartheid?
It was difficult because my life was never safe. Our lives as a family was never safe. We never knew when the special branch would knock on the door and one or both my parents would be arrested and disappear. The house would be raided, and things became progressively more frightening. And we became, as a family, more isolated, because people were scared to be seen talking to us. And then if people were friendly, then we were worried that they were informers. So it was a double-edged thing. And in the 60s, things were really hard. People were being arrested and tortured and murdered in detention and fleeing the country. So it was hard and a lot of trauma. There was a lot of trauma. And my mother, when my mother was reading the book, she said, I don't know if I could have done what I did if I'd known how it would have affected you. And I think as a mother, you often feel guilty if things aren't right for your children. Yeah. And I said to her, she must never feel guilty. It wasn't her who did those things to me. It was the apartheid system that traumatized me. It wasn't my parents.
Well, I was going to ask you if you ever feel contempt towards your parents, but I guess the answer is no. That you don't look back and hold them responsible for anything that you've experienced.
No. I mean, there's obviously, like with all families, there's internal dynamics, and you get fed up with your parents or your brothers or your sisters. But so there's obviously those very common internal family dynamics, but definitely not the political side of things.